Today I'm going to talk about prediction. How do people see the future? How do I see the future? How do you see the future? Hi, welcome back to the channel, and I'm going to talk about prediction, but if I'm going to talk about prediction, I also have to talk about time a little bit as well, because prediction is being able to see ahead in time, isn't it? And you know, can we explain time? Time is one of those things that's pretty mind-boggling, isn't it, when you think about it, you know? Could you imagine an existence without time? Or could you imagine an existence where time happens all at once? Or I mean, it's something we take for granted, and yet in a lot of ways it's very hard to describe even, and science has problems with this as well, of course. You know, it's the whole basis of so many concepts now in quantum theory and relativity and all the rest. There's this whole concept of what is time. But certainly from our standpoint, where we are observing it in this Newtonian world, as it were, time seems to run in a sort of straight line. It seems to have a beginning, a middle and an end almost. It moves like an arrow. Perhaps a better way of describing it is it moves like a piece of film going through a camera. As the film goes through, the light goes through each frame, doesn't it, and flashes a projection, and that where the light goes through is the present moment, and that's the now. And yet there are frames ahead and frames after, so we see the snapshot of this present moment, and then it's in the past and the film has gone through. But there's also, as it were, ahead film running ahead off the spool, which would suggest in some respects that time is already happened, that it's already there, that those frames in that projector are already there. And perhaps people like myself get a glimpse of those frames before they go through the projector. Now, it could be that all of us, not just people like myself that claim to have precognition, but all of us have this sense of being able to see the future, this sense of precognition. And it may, for some of us, like myself, become something conscious, because I obviously focus on this. I meditate upon these things, and perhaps this faculty in me becomes more alert than in other people. But could it be also that everybody has a ability to see slightly ahead in time? You know, all of us. I mean, we certainly get glimpses of the future in dreams, do we not? Do many people have spoken to me? Even the most skeptical of people sometimes see flashes of events that are going to happen in dreams. Not always exactly, I find interesting, not always exactly, but the general trend is often there. You know, you might, for example, you know, just thinking of something random, you might, for example, dream of a man wearing a strange red hat, and the next day you see someone wearing a strange blue hat, but it's the encounter with this strange hat that's the essence of the story. It's not a very good example, but you know what I mean. It's that sometimes things, you get a feel of the future but not the whole thing. And perhaps some of us are always kind of getting these sort of senses of the future. Perhaps that's what déjà vu is, that eerie feeling that we've been here before, that there's something around the corner, that strange feeling you get of coincidences, when most extraordinary things happen completely out the blue. And perhaps we experience the future not consciously, but unconsciously. It's in the background of our awareness. Now, there was a Canadian scientist called Dr. Ian Stevenson, who did a lot of interesting paranormal research. He's known particularly for his work on reincarnation, but he did some interesting research into precognition. And one of the things that he found out that seemed to suggest that we unconsciously have a knowledge of the future is that he started to look at some of the statistics of accidents. And he found that sometimes in disasters, his studies suggested that there's kind of a precognition faculty at work on an unconscious level in us. And he found that passengers that boarded trains and ships and aeroplanes that were due to have a disaster were not fully booked. There was always less passengers on planes and aeroplanes and so forth that were involved in accidents and disasters, as if people were deliberately not booking it. Somehow they'd cancelled. There were less people on the flights, for example, never fully booked, as if a lot of people, statistically, he said, we can prove this because here's the facts. These are the facts. Less people took this flight. Why? And it crashed. And one of the most interesting ones is the study he did of the Titanic. Because on the Titanic, it set out on its maiden voyage in 1912, and it was its first maiden voyage. So it had, these were tickets that were really well sought after, and it had an unusually large number of people cancelled. Many of the people were unable to give any other reason that they cancelled other than the fact that it was the maiden voyage and it was unlucky to sail on a ship's maiden voyage. But these tickets were well sought after. There was one London businessman called J. Connor Middleton. He cancelled because he had a vivid dream in which he saw the ship floating on the sea, keel upwards, and her passengers and crew swimming around her. That's the actual description that he says. This was a precise description of the tragedy. So this man had had a vision of what was going to happen, and there were many others that reported similar things of why they cancelled going on the Titanic. Now, the psychiatrist Stevenson's investigations revealed an impressive number of predictions of the sinking of the Titanic. Now, the Titanic went down in my hometown, sailed from my hometown of Southampton. I even have stories from my grandmother who told me about the terrible tragedy when it happened. And she was a little girl of 8 years old at the time. I think she was 8. And she was with her mum, and people were crying on the street, she said, when the Titanic went down, when they heard the news. And because so many people from the area she came from in Chapel, sailors came from there on the Titanic. Every other house on the street, she said, in Chapel in Southampton was flying black flags. The whole of Southampton had these black flags, and her as a little girl found it frightening. And even one of the survivors of the Titanic actually came to stayed as a lodger at my grandmother's parents' house, and he was so upset by it all, he actually committed suicide in the house. So even my family in the background, were affected by the Titanic, because that man couldn't bear the fact that he'd actually survived the disaster. So anyway, I've digressed a little bit, but the Titanic itself is a good example of how sometimes people have cancelled trips for no apparent reason. For example, there's another interesting one about a Mrs. Marshall who suddenly had a vivid mental image of hundreds of people struggling in icy waters and crying out, "That ship is going to sink before she reaches America." And at the very hour when the ship did sink, a woman in New York awoke from a nightmare in which she had seen her mother in a crowded lifeboat in the mid-ocean and had heard the cries of the people drowning at sea and seen a great upturned liner take its final plunge. The woman did not know at the time that her mother had booked a passage on the Titanic. So, the Titanic stories are fascinating in that they seem to suggest, don't they, that people have this unconscious knowledge of the future. Why did these people cancel, and why did these people kind of know, I mean, people like you that are watching this channel, many of you will be convinced by psychic powers already, but these things, I think, could convince even the skeptic that precognition does exist. So back to this concept of what time is. There was a man called J.W. Dunne, or Dunne, D-U-N-N-E, who wrote a book, An Experiment with Time, that I found very fascinating. It was written back in 1929, but he was talking about this idea that there's serial time, that time has very different levels to it. And he used to express it as that he used to kind of find his mind would get tangled up in this concept, and would sometimes jump between different layers of time, as it were, and that all of us have this ability to jump between layers of time. But it doesn't come through the rational mind. The rational mind, because it is linear, because it kind of thinks in a straight line like time does, it can't get behind this concept of linear time. So what we do is we get flashes of insights into the underlying strange structure of time through our other form of thinking, through our irrational mind, through our intuition, through our unconscious mind. Because we think on many levels, don't we? We think rationally, but when we go to sleep, our mind is not rational. And this is why sometimes during sleep, we get access to a different way of thinking, a different way of perceiving the world, and a different way of perceiving time itself. And when you go into meditation, you're also in a state that goes towards that timelessness. If you've ever sat in meditation for a long time, you might find periods where long periods have passed and it feels like seconds. And then other times when a few seconds have passed and it feels like you've been away for ages. You know, we change our association with time. In fact, you know, Dunne was writing back in 1929, and things have moved forward since. And many people now also think about time in terms of the new discoveries in quantum theory. My thoughts are that consciousness, where I am now, is not in this physical body, but in another field of existence. And that other field of existence, some have called the spirit, but some could call it the quantum world, where time takes very different, strange and unusual turns. So we're all in another state of consciousness all the time. We don't realize it. We just happen to become over-focused on the world in front of us. But if we turn our attention inward, perhaps that's how we can access these other ways of time, how we can get some insight, and maybe that's how we can get a prediction of the future. Whether the future is completely set or whether the future can be changed by free will is such a big topic that I'll have to cover that in a future video. Anyway, I hope that's given you something to think about. I hope you find that interesting. And as I'm an author and a psychic and a medium and so forth, I also write books. And if you haven't seen already, have a look at my book, Messages from the Universe. Because in this book, I look at the whole concept of time, particularly in view of the fact that I was given messages from 10,000 years ago that changed my life and my whole view of the world. And it also takes into account my ideas about the spirit world and what is time like in the spirit world. Do they still experience linear time, that time that travels like an arrow or a piece of film like I've described? Anyway, do have a look at that. And if you get very interested in this topic, do follow this channel. Click the little bell thing below there and you'll get updates every week. And if you're really interested in this channel, see all the extras going on in the background by becoming a patron of the site. And also have a look at the events section on my website, because Jane and I are out doing the theatres soon, and you'll be able to see us live and experience our psychic work in a live setting. Okay, thanks for joining us. See you soon. Bye for now. My wife Jane and I do our public work for free. We raise money through the theatres to raise money for our Hamilton Parker Foundation. This is a not-for-profit company that is soon to be registered as a charity. Now, our work is going in to help with the objectives of this charity. But you can help us as well by becoming what we call a patron of this channel. Now, as a patron, you'll get, first of all sorts of really interesting benefits. You'll have a sort of behind the scenes look at what goes on with our work. You'll get videos before other people. You'll get new videos. You'll get all sorts of benefits that are explained in the patron website, and it has various tiers that you can subscribe to. So you can subscribe to just a little bit and get a few benefits, or you can subscribe a lot and get a lot of benefits. And what this means is that we can raise some money through this channel. Now, this money's not going to me and Jane to give us a fancy lifestyle. This money is going into our foundation that has some fantastic objectives. Now, the first thing we want to do with the foundation is, first of all, get a cyber center together, a cyber temple, as it were, a place where we can introduce new people to you through this channel. So by supporting this channel and giving something to the as a patron, you will find that this channel will start to get better and better content with more and more interesting things going on. We'll be able to get the cameras, we'll be able to have the space, we'll be able to have the right setting where we can build the energy to do things such as mediumistic circles and so forth online. But also our work extends further than that, because we are hoping ultimately to build a spiritual center, a psychic ashram, as it were, where people like you can come to visit and take part in an interactive way through this channel as well. But also we are doing a lot of what we call spiritual service. We are going out and giving a large part of the income we generate to people in India who are destitute. We've given to schools, we've fed children that are in need, we've helped mentally handicapped people, we've given cows to old people in India. Some of all this you'd have seen in my movie Mystic Journey to India on Amazon. But all of this is part of our mission, part of our remit to help the world. Because we're not only trying to find our divine nature, we're also trying to live what we learn and express it in ways that are really beneficial to the world. So if you follow this channel, but more importantly, if you become a patron of this channel, you can help us to take this whole mission onto a much higher level than any psychic work has ever been done before.